continue my talk with İbrahim Yasa, as so far I have summarized his educational development, how he started in Balıkesir primary educational schools, and then moved to Izmir Teachers College, and then how, as a teacher, elementary school teacher, he moved to Karaman, and then to Izmir, and then he is registered in philosophy and law departments of Istanbul University, and then after that he entered into a scholarship exam to go to a university in United States of America, and won that. And in 1934 he went to America. First he went to Missouri University, and he did an MA at first, bachelor's degree. He got in a bachelor's degree completion, although he started in Istanbul University. He hasn't completed it, so he completed his bachelor's education, bachelor's degree, and then he wrote a thesis on agricultural reform in Mexico, and hence he entered into the field of rural sociology. Actually, he continued as a rural sociologist in his PhD studies. He's in America, and he did a field work in American towns and villages about attitudes of high school students. He administered a questionnaire and different towns and villages, and he compared them. The title of his PhD thesis was "A Comparative Study of Selected Attitudes of Rural and Town High School Seniors." So seniors, the last year of high school, he gave the questionnaire to the last year students, senior students in lycées, in the towns and villages, in a selected area, of course, of America. So he completed his thesis and obtained his PhD degree in 1940. Okay, now he returned to Turkey, and he was appointed as a teacher in Hasanoğlan village. Now, Hasanoğlan, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, like Teachers College in Izmir that he attended, more or less starting from middle of 30s to the beginning of 50s, there was a village institutes movement in Turkey, and in various parts of Turkey, village institutes were established, and village children are educated in these village institutes to raise them as village primary school teachers. Now, Hasanoğlan was one of those village institute villages. Now, in that village, in Hasanoğlan village, a village institute was established, and it was continuing when Hasanoğlan went, when İbrahim Yasa went to Hasanoğlan with a PhD as a sociologist. He went there, and for 6 years he taught sociology and various other courses in a village institute. So he contributed to the development of or to the graduation of many village teachers, and they went to their own villages to be teachers, to contribute to the development of their villages and to the development of children in those villages, and they're going into high school, junior high school, senior high school, and university, and that is really an important contribution. But Ibrahim Yasa, being a sociologist, did not stop there. What he did a rural sociological research in the village of Hasanoğlan. Between 1942 and 48, he is in the Hasanoğlan Village Institute doing this research. And in 1955, he published it as Hasanoğlan, Socioeconomic Structure of a Turkish Village. Now, he says that while doing his study, he was influenced, and many people are influenced. I am also influenced by a village institute graduate teacher, Mahmut Makal, graduated from one of the village institutes, went to his village and wrote a book, Our Village, Bizim Köy. Now, Our Village, Bizim Köy, this book consists of observations about the village. It's a traditional village. There is no impact of the markets yet, of technology. It is almost untouched traditional village subsistence agriculture, using plow to have agricultural production, etc., etc. So Mahmut Makal describes his village into minute detail. Being from that village himself, he knows all the families there, so he describes them. So Ibrahim Yasa, anyway, he's a rural sociologist. He's a rural sociologist in Missouri University and Cornell University. He visited some American villages, but it's a Turkish village being transformed by the establishment of a village institute there towards the middle of 1930s. But not only that, there is a second factor in the transformation of Hasanoğlan village, in contrast to Mahmut Makal's village. There was a railway that crossed nearby Hasanoğlan village. So even before the village institute came to this village, was established in this village, there was already this railroad and, of course, train regularly coming and going, and there's a station nearby, and that's a tremendous influence in the transformation of production in the village, transportation in the village, economic structure in the village, social structure in the village, administrative structure of the village, and family structures of the village. So Ibrahim Yasa, between 1942 and 44, but he started the research in 1944. So from 1944 to for 4 years, he had a participant observation in the village. Not only a participant observation, but also being a quantitative, adopting a quantitative approach. He also devised a questionnaire and applied it to the household health in the village. So he analyzed the data that he collected the quantitative data that he collected through theirs, and also data that he obtained through his own observations in the village. So this book, I mean, these analyses contributed to the publication of his first book, as I said, the socioeconomic structure of a Turkish village, Hasanoğlan. So there is Hasanoğlan, a colon, and a colon, and then socioeconomic structure of a village. So you know that it is on the basis of Hasanoğlan socioeconomic structure that he's trying to understand Turkish village. For example, in later period, maybe I mentioned this to you. I think you had your rural sociology from me. Paul Sterling, for example, studied 2 villages in Kayseri, and he also wrote a book called Turkish Village. So starting from 2 villages in Kayseri, he's trying to understand Turkish villages, but earlier than him, or more or less, let me see. Although Ibrahim Yasa''s book was published in 1955, Paul Sterling's book is published in 1965, but his observations, Sterling's observations, are carried out during 1949, 50, and 51. So just 3, I mean, almost consecutive. That is, in 1948, Ibrahim Yasa finished his research, and then next year, Paul Sterling started his research. I don't know whether they knew each other. I'm sorry that I didn't ask this question to both of them. I knew both of them. Ibrahim Yasa, after he retired from university, came to my department, and I was the head of the department then, and I was glad to have Ibrahim Yasa in our department as a part-time professor, teaching, for example, Turkish sociologists. He was teaching this course in Middle East Technical University, and we did some research together, etc. Anyway, now I am sorry that I didn't ask Ibrahim Yasa whether he knew Paul Sterling in 1949 when Paul Sterling was deciding his village study, or I could have asked same thing to Paul Sterling, because Paul Sterling was also in my sociology department for 1 or 2 years, whether he knew at that time Ibrahim Yasa. Of course, in a later period, they knew each other. But the critical thing is whether at that point in 1948, 49, they knew each other. Anyway, this book, as I said, became a classic rural sociological research in Turkey, how a village is being transformed, one by establishment of a railroad that crosses nearby, 2 by the establishment of a Republican institution, village institute, a village institute. Now, he didn't stop there. 25 years later, Ibrahim Yasa did a revisit study. Now, in sociology, and actually in all social sciences, revisit studies are very important. That is, you go and do participant observation, depth interviews, apply a questionnaire, administrative questionnaire, you collect data, and then 10 years later, 20 years later, 25 years later, you go back to the same neighborhood, same village, same city, and do a revisit. Now, that way, you compare the baseline, your initial research, and 25 years later, what happened? Now, this becomes a longitudinal study. The first one is a sectional study. You collect data, okay, in the case of İbrahim Yasa, between 1944-48, and you analyze that. So you know about the village, and you go back there 25 years later, and what happened? So the changes in the family structure, how village institute as a village institute is being closed, and instead a teachers college, öğretmen okulu, is being established. The extent of education, all those. He studied them, and he published, as I said, this book, Hasanoğlan Village After 20 Years, a comparative sociological research. And this is really a very important signpost for sociology. Now, before that is, this is in 1969 that Hasanoğlan Village After 25 Years is published in 1969. But between 1955, the first publication of Hasanoğlan, Socioeconomic Structure of a Turkish Village, he wanted to be, he applied for associate professorship. But somehow the committee that examined him wanted him to do another village study. So in Sindel village, he did a second Turkish village study, and it's called Social and Economic Structure of Sindel Village, and that's published in 1960. Okay, so his village studies continued afterwards, but then gradually he moved into more micro level understanding of these villages. For example, he has chosen an interesting topic: elopement of girls. Elopement of girls. Elopement of girls. This is kız kaçırma. Huh? There were this institution, and this is a kind of what should we say, deviant. Okay, deviant. It's a deviant activity. Some people in the villages, preferably, they love each other, but somehow girl's family is not ready or rejects boys' proposal to marry their daughter. So the two together agree to escape. For example, famous İnce Mehmet, Yaşar Kemal's novel, world famous, I don't know how many languages it is translated into, maybe 40 languages in the world. İnce Mehmet the novel starts with elopement of Hatice, in this case, Mehmet elopes Hatice and goes to the mountain and becomes bandit, eşkıya, İnce Mehmet. The topic of the novel of Yaşar Kemal. Now, İbrahim Yasa included this article. You can read it. This article on elopement of the girls. I included here the title. Let's see. This one. It is published in English, and it's called Traditions of Some Atypical Cases of Marriage in Turkey. And the title is Traditions of Some Atypical Cases of Marriage in Turkey. Atypical. Yes, this is elopement of a girl. So for some time, the two together stay in the mountain or in the next village or in the town or in the city. And then hopefully, eventually, girl's family accepts them. So they come back and they become a recognized family. But the starting point is atypical. Is this a tradition? I mean, it's atypical. So usually institutionalized arrangement, a tradition, they are usually typical, consensual, accepted by everybody in the village or in the neighborhood or whatever. But this is also a side issue, is being accepted, it seems. I mean, since some boys and girls resort into this practice of escaping together, but sometimes this is not always the two together and with the willingness of the girl. Sometimes, unfortunately, although girl also is unwilling, some boys together with some other helpers, assistants, elope the girl, which in that case, that is violence. Yeah. Violence. Anyway, in 1962, he publishes this research as Elopement of Girls and some related administrative issues. Now, another one in the same year, he does another atypical marriage, another atypical marriage. This is the atypical marriage, actually. That article that I put there is this one. In Turkish, it is Tay Geldi ailesi. Now, Tay Geldi ailesi is two widowed man and woman with opposite sex children. Man has a girl, let's say, a widow, wife died, and she has the daughter. And woman, husband died, and has a boy. These two widowed man and woman married together in order, and this is an interesting atypical tradition also, they marry too. So the woman's boy, son, okay, and the man's daughter, or vice versa, okay, the man's son and the woman's daughter, they marry with each other. So sometimes this is parallel, married together. So parents marry and they become wife and husband, and their children marry and they become wife and husband. So it becomes two families. And this way, if two families are poor and in a difficulty in their life, and the woman and her son or daughter, being alone with maybe not much land, and the man and his daughter or son losing the wife, maybe having some land but unable to manage food or cleaning or or agriculture, being unable to do it. But when they combine their resources, their land, their skills, their education, and their offsprings, they become a stronger family. Two families is better than to have families, kind of separated or widowed families. Okay, and this is interesting. Yeah, İbrahim Yasa, both Elopement of Girls and this tay geldi ailesi, this atypical marriage. These are interesting stuff. Tay geldi, I don't know whether you know tay. Tay is the offspring of a horse offspring. So usually horses and their offsprings follow each other. Horse goes and the offspring follows the mother. So when the mother and the father, in this case, come together with them, the follower, their offspring, tay, offspring here is tay. Analogy, there's an analogy here. They also come and they also marry. Tay geldi ailesi. So that's the traditional name given by the common sense of the people. And they qualified this atypical marriage in this way with a kind of analogy. Okay, now this is his third or fourth study. Now he continues his studies on family, and in 1966 he published a study on squatter families and squatter housing. Now, starting the beginning of 1950s, Turkish villages started being transformed as a result of, we discussed all these in rural sociology, as a result of expansion of markets to integrate villages, first along the railroads, along other roads, land roads, etc. First around the cities, and then eventually in the remotest corner, there is an expansion of national market. As that expands, people start producing for the market, cash cropping, depending on, as you remember, depending on the quality of land, whether it is irrigated or not, etc. There are typology of the villages on that basis. I have studies on that, and I introduced them to you. But what's happening is a commodification, a petty commodity problem. I don't know whether you will remember that. So that is the transformations that are going on in the villages. Now, as a result of that transformation, and as a result of some medical improvements in the villages, families are growing and the land is not enough anymore. So many members except one member, one boy, one male son, okay, son, of course, son is male, yes, male son stays in the village, others go to the cities, migration. As they migrate, there are no houses ready for them. So, as you know, there is a mushrooming of gecekondu squatter housing all around the central cities of Istanbul, of Ankara, of Izmir, of Adana, all large cities of Turkey start receiving all this migration through 50s and through 60s. So by 1960s, the middle of 1960s, as Ibrahim Yasa was doing his research, there is now almost established gecekondu family, squatter housing families. How are they? Now, they are in the city, yes, in the periphery of the city, but their connections with the villages continue. Their brothers, their parents are there. They marry from their neighbors in the village, or they marry from their neighbors who migrated with them, chain migration to the neighborhood. Okay, so they are villagers in the city. Gecekondu families are usually they are families in the city, but their rural traditions now by 1960s did not change much. As you know, family and culture change very gradually. So it is different from nuclear city type family of the educated middle class, or even of working class that work in the factories, where they limit their children, the number of children, they plan their children, they have family planning, a kind of. But these newly migrated families, as being still peasants, villagers, they have more children than typical middle class, or even in a later period, workers' families. So Ibrahim Yasa had one of classical studies on squatter housing. There has been many other studies, but this is one of the contributions to feminist studies and to urban sociology. Now, another area that Ibrahim Yasa contributed is about migration, not to Turkish cities, but to Germany and France, international migration. As you know from your urban sociology, other sociological studies, during after Second World War, as Germany and other European countries started their reindustrialization after the long-lasting Second World War and the destructions during the Second World War, they needed labor power. So they got their labor power from the periphery. So for Germany, the periphery was Turkey. For France, the periphery was Northern Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Turkey and Germany, because during Ottoman times, Turkey and Germany had relationships already. For example, in 1915, war in the Dardanelles, Çanakkale War, the general in Ottoman army in 1915 is a German general. Although in the front, Atatürk is the directing the war in the field, but in Istanbul. Anyway, there is this German-Turkish collaboration, long-lasting German-Turkish collaboration, and this ended up in attracting Turkish workers in the Germany. And in the Turkish people said, okay, Germany is very close to us. We are friends there. So from the villages, without even going to the city, they went to Germany, to Berlin, to other, of course, Western Berlin, not Eastern Berlin, and Kreuzberg, for example, became a Turkish sub-district of Berlin city. There are so many I have visited. Now, Ibrahim Yasa did not go to Germany to study these Turkish migrant workers, or Germans called them guest workers. Gastarbeiter, German Gastarbeiter, English guest worker, Turkish misafir işçi. I don't know whether Turkish people called themselves misafir işçi. I'm not sure. No. Turkish people called them Almancı. Those who went to Germany to work, to earn money, and to send their savings into their families in Turkey. Now, for some time, during later half of 1960s and during 70s, if there were no Turkish workers in Germany and other European countries sending their remittances to Turkey, there could have been an economic crisis earlier than 1978 or 79, as you know. If you remember, we studied this in the structure of Turkish society, social structure of Turkey. I remember that course, and we studied all these remittances from Çağlar Keyder's book, Class and State. That book, remember that book? Okay. Now, during 70s, these Turkish workers in Germany and other European countries sending their money to families and building some houses in the villages or doing some investment, and that was really an important source of revenue, hard currency for Turkey. But eventually that was not enough too. Anyway, now İbrahim Yasa studied return of the Almancı, coming back of the Turkish workers that went to Germany. So his work is returning workers and social change. Okay, it's published as Returning Workers and Social Change. That is, again, his rural sociologist approach is continuing. He administered questionnaires to returnees. In English, it's called returnee Almancı families. And he asked them about their experiences in Germany, their experience, why they didn't stay, for example, or some part of family stayed in Germany or other European countries, but some part came and settled in the into the villages. Now, whether their family structure is different than when they went to Germany, whether family structures are changing, how their attitudes are changing. Remember, his PhD study is about the attitudes of high school students in United States America, in the towns and villages. And now, in the villages of Turkey, various villages, he selected a sample from the returnees and how they distributed in the different villages. And he administered these questionnaires all over. He analyzed that, and he has written a study. This is how migration contributes, return migration actually in this case, return migration contributes to social change taking place in the villages as a result of many other factors also, of course, but also as a result of these returning migrants, the returning Almanca. Actually, Almanca is a social type. At that time, during 60s and 70s, this book is published in 79, and already Ibrahim Yasa was with us in my department. We were together when he analyzed this and published this book. The Almanca social type at that time was the man with a hat, fötter hat. I don't know what is that in English. Metin might find that. Fötter şapka. And there is a kind of feather here, a colored feather, and there's a transistor radio in his hand. And later, they started having cars, German cars, and driving back with their German cars, coming to vacation or returning to resettle into their former villages. Anyway, so this is one of the quantitative studies about this Almanca social type and their families, their reintegration into the social structures of the villages, which they left earlier to go as migrant workers to European countries. This is an important contribution. Fedora, fedora hat, fedora hat. So that is a word maybe from Spanish or from Italian, I couldn't tell. Worn by bureaucrats from, for example, during 30s, when you see Atatürk and people around him, they have this type of a hat after hat revolution, etc. And then there is also a peasant hat, which is not fedora hat, but it's a different type of hat. I don't know. I call that köylü şapkası, peasant hat. Anyway, so Almanca man, the social type is different from native villager, or the villager of that village, which has a normal peasant hat. Anyway, this is. I hope you will read it.